everyone, my name is Lee Howard and now I'm going to talk about international terms of trade. The Incoterm 2020 are a set of 11 individual rules issued by the International Chambers of Commerce (ICC), which define the responsibility of sellers and buyers for the sales of goods in international transactions. Next, the exporter or the importer is responsible for the first one is pre-carriage, which is the domestic transportation in the exporting country. And the second one is the main carriage, which is the international transportation between the exporting country and the importing country. And the third one is on carriage, which is the domestic transportation in the importing country. The fourth one is the risk involved in international transportation. The last one is a custom clearance in the importing country. Next, the factor of choosing the correct Incoterm rules. First one is the type of product being sold. For example, the weight, volume, perishability, value, and sensitivity to temperature changes. And the second is the method of shipment. For example, the land, air, and sea. The third one is the ability and willingness of either of the exporter and importer to perform the task involved. The last one is the amount of trust placed by either of the party in the other party. Besides, there are two groups of Incoterm rules, which is 7 Incoterm rules that can be used for any means of transportation, such as the ocean, road, and train. And also there are 4 Incoterm rules that can only be used for ocean transportation. These are the oldest terms of trade. To focus on 7 Incoterm rules. The first one is EXW. EXW means the seller has fulfilled its obligation when the goods are made available to the buyer, usually at the seller location. The seller should package the goods appropriately or as specified in the agreement between the both parties. The buyer is responsible for loading the goods on their transport and everything else necessary to get the goods to the final destination. So the risk or liability for the goods transfer from the seller to the buyer when the goods are made available at the named place. The second is FCA. FCA means the seller loads the goods on the buyer's transport at the seller premise, or the seller deliver them to another named place. Most often, the buyer hires a transport that pick up the goods at the seller warehouse. The seller must load the goods on the buyer transport, at which point the risk from the goods transfer to the buyer. Alternatively, the seller and the buyer may agree that the seller transport the goods to a place other than the seller warehouse, such as the freight forwarder warehouse or the carrier terminal. The risk or liability for the goods transfer from the seller to the buyer when the goods are made available at the named place. In this case, the buyer is responsible for unloading the goods from the seller transport.
A factory in Colombia offers a quotation containing Incoterm FCA. This means that the seller organizes transport, insurance, and unloading of the goods in the port of Cartagena. The seller also files an export declaration with customs in Colombia and takes care of all export documents. The buyer arranges a ship and transport to the Netherlands, files an import declaration, pays import duties and VAT, and arranges transport from the port of Rotterdam to their location.
The third is CPT. CPT means the seller is responsible for clearing the goods for export and delivering them to the first carrier or another person stipulated by the seller at the foreign freight terminal, at which point risk transfer to the buyer. The seller selects and pays the international carriers and is responsible for loading and offloading goods at the named place of destinations. The fourth is the CIP. CIP means the seller is responsible for delivering goods to the first carrier or another person stipulated by the seller at the named place of shipment, at which point risk transfer to the buyer. The seller is responsible for the transportation costs and insurance associated with delivering goods at least to the named place of destinations. The fifth is DFP. DFP means the seller is responsible for all charges and risk is transit until the goods reach their destination, at which point the risk transfer to buyer. Cost and risk transfer to the seller to buyer simultaneously at the point the goods are available for unloading. The buyer is responsible for all costs and risks associated with unloading the goods, clearing customs to import the good into the destination. The buyer selects a custom broker and is responsible for entry fees, duties, tax, inspection fees, and storage fees. If goods are not released in timely manner, the seller must coordinate with the buyer custom broker to provide any documentation required for export clearance. Other six is DPU. DPU means the seller is responsible for clearing the goods for export and bills or risk and costs associated with the delivering the goods and unloading them at the named port or place of destination. The buyer is responsible for all costs and risks from this point forward, including clearing the goods for import at the named country of destinations. And the last is the seventh, DDP. DDP put the maximum risk and responsibility on the seller. It requires the seller take responsibility for clearing the goods for export, bear all risks and costs associated with delivering the goods, unload goods at the terminal at the named port or place of destination, clear the goods for import clearance, payment, and bring the goods to the place of destination. Risk transfer to the buyer at the destination, so it should be stated clearly and precisely. Thanks for your listening.